their brains are trying to acclimatise to a level of status that we just haven't evolved to experience. So we become slightly insane. In the hunter-gatherer tribes in which we evolved tens of thousands of years ago, they were a status game, just like human groups are now, and the more status that you had in those groups, as I said, the better everything got. The more food you got, the better food you got, the safer your sleeping sites, the greater your access to your choice of mates. So, it plugs directly into survival and reproduction. The more status that you earned in those groups, the better your chances of survival and reproduction. So it's completely enmeshed in the experience of being alive.
But in those days, you didn't need fame because groups were so much smaller. Everybody knew everybody already.
There was no such thing as fame. So the groups were, a few dozen people. So you might get reputations as a great storyteller, a great hunter, a great tuber finder, whatever, and that would be great. But I think what's happened now is that our groups, we're still tribal, we still have these brains that are pursuing status, but as our groups have grown bigger, the available status has grown bigger. As we've settled down and things like private property and ownership of land have become possible, these, back in the days of the hunter-gatherer tribe, a successful hunter might have a necklace of teeth, and that would be his or her claim to status. Now, as soon as private property becomes possible, you can own countries, nations. You can become an emperor. So the ways in which we can play status games has massively expanded since the beginning of agriculture, really, and now kind of in the days of international media and social media, it's expanded yet again. So our craving for status was actually been there since before we were human. Animals, pursue status. But now it's just the status that's available is just massively amplified. So it becomes a hugely tempting and desirous kind of state to be, because the resources that we can accrue by being our status are just unimaginable to previous generations.
So, Stefan, 30 years ago, say, if you asked boys at school what they wanted to be, they still wanted to be successful and have status. They'd say, I want to be a footballer, or I want to be a pop star, or I want to be whatever. But they didn't just say, I want to be famous. That's what's changed, isn't it? And presumably that's because of social media, which has actually democratized fame. I mean, it has allowed those people to become famous through YouTube who would never have had the chance otherwise, I guess. Maybe that's a good thing.
It's a complex thing, and it's happening on very many levels. So why is that child now desiring to become a footballer? And I think there was a study in 2009 which said that most people, actually I'm not quite sure the dates, but before, when people would say they would want to be a teacher or a doctor, that did change and people wanted to become celebrities. But again, I think it's that desire which is manufactured in some ways, because it's partly a shortcut, that you can become famous just for being famous, that you can bypass all the hard work, that you can get to this elevated place. And again, we're going back to this desire in people to be recognized, to be heard, to be seen, which is basically the ego, which is narcissism. But we all have, playing against the desire of the masses to have someone who they can look and worship and admire or make fun of. But this idea that it's a kind of symbiotic relationship, they both are needed. But yes, now the gatekeepers are gone and anyone can become famous very rapidly and gain a great deal of fame and fortune. Now, one thing that I always say, and I warn people, is like, once you become famous, you can't reverse that.
Yeah,
the only way out. So you should be very, very careful of what you wish for. Richard Burton described fame as a sweet poison that you gulp eagerly at first and then you loathe for the rest of your life.
Well, this is the paradox which you touched on as well, Polly, isn't it? That, all these people who say they want to become famous, they've seen their idols have nervous breakdowns, get addicted to drugs or alcohol or whatever. Why do they still want to be famous, do you think?
I think there's a real feeling of that won't happen to me. I think generally when people get famous, they're really young. And how daft are you at 18, 19, 20? Like you know nothing. Yeah. And somebody's offering you this thing that is largely really celebrated. And you tune out all the addictions and the drug overdoses. And I think up until recently, people weren't open about their mental health. So people didn't necessarily need to die of fame, of overdose and that pressure. But they could have a really, really hard time after it. And if they weren't speaking openly about it, who knew? I always think, I interview pop stars at the height of their fame and then quite often interview them a few years later. And how extraordinary to peak at 24 years old. And then what are you doing? The rest of your life is this gentle, if you're lucky, decline. You never reach the heights you reached at 24 again. And that's actually hideous. That's a really difficult thing to navigate. But I think when you're very young and somebody's offering you fame, I don't think you think for 1 minute the bad stuff's going to happen to you. You can only see the great stuff. Also, you are by definition surrounded by a bunch of people who are like, this is great because they're your manager, they're your agent. There are a load of people for whom you can make a lot of money. And even if their intentions are kind of good, it's very hard to separate your appreciation of your golden goose client with their mental health and their future prospects. I also think for some people it does work out. I think some people I've met, some who become friends, I think the key to it is the later it happens, the better. And I think, and when we were talking about influencers earlier, I have noticed, and in a couple of interviews I've done recently, the people who are happiest and best adjusted with it become famous of something they like, of a product, a film, a TV show in one case. An actor I interviewed recently, they are so proud of this thing that has simultaneously made them famous that they are in a better state to deal with it because they feel there is no disconnect between this adulation they're getting and this sense that, I did something good. I think that's quite often the problem. You're getting adored, mindlessly adored, because when you're famous, you serve a purpose for your fans, mainly. You become this thing that they need, the icon. You become something to aspire to. You aren't actually who you are. It's incredibly dehumanizing, incredibly objectifying. So there is this massive chasm between the person you feel yourself to be and the adoration you're getting. And I think marrying those two is a real issue for people. However, if you've done something you're really, really proud of, it's easier. There's, you can go, I deserve at least a little bit of this. This makes sense to me.
So you have a sense of purpose in life.
You have a sense of purpose, and you have a sense that you've done something good. And so I talked to an actor, there's a show coming on very soon called The Bear, which I don't think is over here yet, but it's done incredibly well in the States. And it's a brilliant, brilliant TV show. It's really, really good. Everything about it's good. The casting's good, the wardrobe's good, the lighting's good, the direction, the script, all of it, the whole cast. So the guy that's become the star off the back of it, the guy who plays this main character, a chef called The Bear, feels like he's part of something great. He's done something good, and he is part of something great. And then it makes sense, doesn't it? Everyone's going, oh my God, you're amazing. You're like, well, yeah, I have done something amazing. And that there is something solid and real in that I think really anchors people.
So in that case, that's a very good segue on to the second question, which is the flip side of that, is whether we should see fame as a talent in itself.
I think it absolutely, is it a talent? It's a skill. It's a skill, and it is a psychological disposition, I think. So I have come to the inclusion increasingly. People are very sneering about reality TV stars. I think reality TV stars have that skill, the ones that get through, the ones that succeed, the ones that kind of have a long game out of it and a brand extension out of it. And I think maybe we're getting to the point of society where people who are very talented but don't have the emotional disposition to endure fame, and it is an endurance, can get on with their talented stuff and let the reality TV stars and the Instagram influencers take the flack, take the adulation, which they are better built to do. So I think it is a skill. I mean, I think the idea that Instagram, the influencer culture has undoubtedly democratized fame in a way that we've never seen before. However, the idea that it's an easy route to fame, it's so hard. You don't have to be talented. You have to work your arse off. You have to have very little feelings of shame, which most of us do. And I don't mean that you're shameless, but you do not for 1 minute think, does anyone care about my lunch? You go, of course people care about my lunch. And some people do, as with the Kardashians, some people do. So it's a really unique kind of psychological setup, and I think there is a lot of narcissism in there. I don't think is it healthy? Don't know. They're not all corrupt, but I think they possibly take something unpleasant away from people who don't enjoy it. And I am in no sense famous. I don't even rate on the alphabet system. But I've had a couple of brushes where my profile has suddenly spiked for different reasons. Once with the book I wrote, and I don't like it. Even when I got a lot of grief for the book I wrote, but I also got a lot of good stuff. What I couldn't stand was the attention. I could not stand being that. I felt incredibly self-conscious. I felt incredibly judged. I felt this sort of the weight of other people's ideas of who I was on me, and I found it confusing. I am not built for it. So I think it's definitely a psychological strength. Is it a strength? It's a
type anyway.
Type. Yeah.
Yes.
So I think you have to have that. I think you really have to be prepared to work very, very hard indeed. Self-promotion is exhausting, and it is endless, and it is all-consuming. And if you want to go out, you will never again be just as like a guide to being an Instagram influencer. If you want to go out for a meal with your friends, you can't do that without taking a picture of you with your friends. So you've got to make sure all your friends are okay about that. Having a little chat in the loo, doing a live stream, putting your food on. And if you don't want to do that, if you want to have a life which is somewhat private or somewhat not for a performance, then it's out. So, yeah, I mean, I think it's not a talent. I think it's a skill, and I think it's a psychology.
It's like being in your own Truman Show, isn't it?
It absolutely is. And a lot of us don't want that.
No. Will, is it a talent in itself?
Well, I just sort of echo what Polly was saying, really. I think it is a talent, but it is definitely a personality type. I think, being specific about it and slightly nerdy, it's probably somebody who's high in extroversion, who enjoys attention and enjoys being around people, and gets a buzz out of getting validation from other people. But also, I think people who crave fame tend to be low in the personality trait of agreeability. So disagreeability correlates with being very competitive and wanting to win. And I think so high extrovert, disagreeable, which is also echoing what something that Stefan said, that's also narcissistic. Exactly. Yeah. That's also the personality type that predisposes you to narcissism, which I think those two things go hand in hand. I mean, one of the interesting things I found when I was doing my research for my status book was that when psychologists research our need for status, they find that it never tails off. So that's why it's different to things like power. So when you give people a certain amount of power, most people don't want too much power, because it's like, with power comes responsibility, and lots of people are expecting things from you. So most people, not like the Donald Trumps of this world, but most people have a limited tolerance for power, which is perhaps not what you'd expect, but it's not true for status. So when psychologists try to find the point where our need for status tails off, they can't find it.
So you're never going to be satisfied.
You're never going to be satisfied. So and what happens, I think, is it ratchets up. I think most people said if you want that level of fame that Polly has just described, most people would just go, no, that sounds like a nightmare. But I think in reality, what happens is it ratchets up. So you get one little victory, and you think, and we're very good at accepting the status that comes our way. We're very good at going, actually, I do deserve all this attention. I do deserve to be here on this stage. And we're very good at accepting that stuff. And then we want more. We acclimatise very quickly to a certain level of fame, and we want more, and we want more, and we want more. And then what happens is you enter this feedback loop. So people who are very successful, so very famous celebrities, CEOs, politicians, world leaders, the Imelda Marcoses and Donald Trumps of this world, their brains are trying to acclimatise to a level of status that we just haven't evolved to experience. So we become slightly insane. You go slightly mad. You get the kind of Kanye West syndrome. So I think I think it's a personality type, and I also think, as Stefan said, it's dangerous.
To continue watching this video, click the link in the top left or in the description below, or visit iai.tv for more debates and talks from the world's leading thinkers on today's biggest ideas.